Despite a clear constitutional commitment to advance social justice, 30 years into democracy, many South Africans are still not free. Not free from hunger, not free from poverty, not free from structural inequality and systemic injustices that continue to hold them back. The Musa Plan for Social Justice is an integrated catalytic plan of action aimed at accelerating the advancement of social justice by breaking the chains of poverty and inequality by 2030. It is a commitment to ensure that no one remains trapped in the circumstances of their birth. For too long, we failed to translate many of the promises we made to ourselves in the Constitution into reality. The Musa Plan seeks to change that. The multi-pronged approach involving policy reform, social accountability, resource mobilization, building state capacity, and strengthen democratic leadership. We need all hands on deck. The Musa Plan is about leveraging data, ensuring that policies are not one-size-fits-all, but tailored to the needs of all, including poor people, women, people with disabilities, children, and rural communities. If we don't deal with poverty and inequality now, it will only get worse. And that poses a real threat to our democracy, the economy, and peace. The plan also focuses on building bridges between communities, healing divisions of the past. It's about creating real opportunities for social mobility for all while ensuring that the future is different from the past. We need you. Join hands with us to make this vision a reality. Together, we can accelerate the fight against poverty and inequality. Join us in the Musa Plan for Social Justice. Together, we will change the trajectory of this nation. Despite a clear constitutional commitment to advance social justice, 30 years into democracy, many South Africans are still not free. Not free from hunger, not free from poverty, not free from structural inequality and systemic injustices that continue to hold them back. The Musa Plan for Social Justice is an integrated catalytic plan of action aimed at accelerating the advancement of social justice by breaking the chains of poverty and inequality by 2030. It is a commitment to ensure that no one remains trapped in the circumstances of their birth. For too long, we failed to translate many of the promises we made to ourselves in the Constitution into reality. The Musa Plan seeks to change that. The multi-pronged approach involving policy reform, social accountability, resource mobilization, building state capacity, and strengthen democratic leadership. We need all hands on deck. The Musa Plan is about leveraging data, ensuring that policies are not one-size-fits-all, but tailored to the needs of all, including poor people, women, people with disabilities, children, and rural communities. If we don't deal with poverty and inequality now, it will only get worse. And that poses a real threat to our democracy, the economy, and peace. The plan also focuses on building bridges between communities, healing divisions of the past. It's about creating real opportunities for social mobility for all while ensuring that the future is different from the past. We need you. Join hands with us to make this vision a reality. Together, we can accelerate the fight against poverty and inequality. Join us in the Musa Plan for Social Justice. Together, we will change the trajectory of this nation. Despite a clear constitutional commitment to advance social justice, 30 years into democracy, many South Africans are still not free. Not free from hunger, not free from poverty, not free from structural inequality and systemic injustices that continue to hold them back. The Musa Plan for Social Justice is an integrated catalytic plan of action aimed at accelerating the advancement of social justice by breaking the chains of poverty and inequality by 2030. It is a commitment to ensure that no one remains trapped in the circumstances of their birth. For too long, we failed to translate many of the promises we made to ourselves in the Constitution into reality. The Musa Plan seeks to change that. The multi-pronged approach involving policy reform, social accountability, resource mobilization, building state capacity, and strengthen democratic leadership. We need all hands on deck. The Musa Plan is about leveraging data, ensuring that policies are not one-size-fits-all, but tailored to the needs of all, including poor people, women, people with disabilities, children, and rural communities. If we don't deal with poverty and inequality now, it will only get worse. And that poses a real threat to our democracy, the economy, and peace. The plan also focuses on building bridges between communities, healing divisions of the past. It's about creating real opportunities for social mobility for all while ensuring that the future is different from the past. We need you. Join hands with us to make this vision a reality. Together, we can accelerate the fight against poverty and inequality. Join us in the Musa Plan for Social Justice. Together, we will change the trajectory of this nation. Despite a clear constitutional commitment to advance social justice, 30 years into democracy, many South Africans are still not free. Not free from hunger, not free from poverty, not free from structural inequality and systemic injustices that continue to hold them back. The Musa Plan for Social Justice is an integrated catalytic plan of action aimed at accelerating the advancement of social justice by breaking the chains of poverty and inequality by 2030. It is a commitment to ensure that no one remains trapped in the circumstances of their birth. For too long, we failed to translate many of the promises we made to ourselves in the Constitution into reality. The Musa Plan seeks to change that. The multi-pronged approach involving policy reform, social accountability, resource mobilization, building state capacity, and strengthen democratic leadership. We need all hands on deck. The Musa Plan is about leveraging data, ensuring that policies are not one-size-fits-all, but tailored to the needs of all, including poor people, women, people with disabilities, children, and rural communities. If we don't deal with poverty and inequality now, it will only get worse. And that poses a real threat threat to our democracy, the economy, and peace. The plan also focuses on building bridges between communities, healing divisions of the past. It's about creating real opportunities for social mobility for all while ensuring that the future is different from the past. We need you. Join hands with us to make this vision a reality. Together, we can accelerate the fight against poverty and inequality. Join us in the Musa plan for social justice. Together, we will change the trajectory of this nation. Despite a clear constitutional commitment to advance social justice, 30 years into democracy, many South Africans are still not free. Not free from hunger, not free from poverty, not free from structural inequality and systemic injustices that continue to hold them back. The Musa Plan for Social Justice is an integrated catalytic plan of action aimed at accelerating the advancement of social justice by breaking the chains of poverty and inequality by 2030. It is a commitment to ensure that no one remains trapped in the circumstances of their birth. For too long, we failed to translate many of the promises we made to ourselves in the Constitution into reality. The Musa Plan seeks to change that. The multi-pronged approach involving policy reform, social accountability, resource mobilization, building state capacity, and strengthen democratic leadership. We need all hands on deck. The Musa Plan is about leveraging data, ensuring that policies are not one-size-fits-all, but tailored to the needs of all, including poor people, women, people with disabilities, children, and rural communities. If we don't deal with poverty and inequality now, it will only get worse. And that poses a real threat to our democracy, the economy, and peace. The plan also focuses on building bridges between communities, healing divisions of the past. It's about creating real opportunities for social mobility for all while ensuring that the future is different from the past. We need you. Join hands with us to make this vision a reality. Together, we can accelerate the fight against poverty and inequality. Join us in the Musa Plan for Social Justice. Together, we will change the trajectory of this nation. Despite a clear constitutional commitment to advance social justice, 30 years into democracy, many South Africans are still not free. Not free from hunger, not free from poverty, not free from structural inequality and systemic injustices that continue to hold them back. The Musa Plan for Social Justice is an integrated catalytic plan of action aimed at accelerating the advancement of social justice by breaking the chains of poverty and inequality by 2030. It is a commitment to ensure that no one remains trapped in the circumstances of their birth. For too long, we failed to translate many of the promises we made to ourselves in the Constitution into reality. The Musa Plan seeks to change that. The multi-pronged approach involving policy reform, social accountability, resource mobilization, building state capacity, and strengthen democratic leadership. We need all hands on deck. The Musa plan is about leveraging data, ensuring that policies are not one size fits all, but tailored to the needs of all, including poor people, women, people with disabilities, children, and rural communities. If we don't deal with poverty and inequality now, it will only get worse. And that poses a real threat to our democracy, the economy, and peace. The plan also focuses on building bridges between communities, healing divisions of the past. It's about creating real opportunities for social mobility for all while ensuring that the future is different from the past. We need you. Join hands with us to make this vision a reality. Together, we can accelerate the fight against poverty and inequality. Join us in the Musa plan for social justice. Together, we will change the trajectory of this nation. Despite a clear constitutional commitment to advance social justice, 30 years into democracy, many South Africans are still not free. Not free from hunger, not free from poverty, not free from structural inequality and systemic injustices that continue to hold them back. The Musa Plan for Social Justice is an integrated catalytic plan of action aimed at accelerating the advancement of social justice by breaking the chains of poverty and inequality by 2030. It is a commitment to ensure that no one remains trapped in the circumstances of their birth. For too long, we failed to translate many of the promises we made to ourselves in the Constitution into reality. The Musa Plan seeks to change that. The multi-pronged approach involving policy reform, social accountability, resource mobilization, building state capacity, and strengthen democratic leadership. We need all hands on deck. The Musa Plan is about leveraging data, ensuring that policies are not one size fits all, but tailored to the needs of all, including poor people, women, people with disabilities, children, and rural communities. If we don't deal with poverty and inequality now, it will only get worse. And that poses a real threat to our democracy, the economy, and peace. The plan also focuses on building bridges between communities, healing divisions of the past. It's about creating real opportunities for social mobility for all while ensuring that the future is different from the past. We need you. Join hands with us to make this vision a reality. Together, we can accelerate the fight against poverty and inequality. Join us in the Musa Plan for Social Justice. Together, we will change the trajectory of this nation. Despite a clear constitutional commitment to advance social justice, 30 years into democracy, many South Africans are still not free. Not free from hunger, not free from poverty, not free from structural inequality and systemic injustices that continue to hold them back. The Musa Plan for Social Justice is an integrated catalytic plan of action aimed at accelerating the advancement of social justice by breaking the chains of poverty and inequality by 2030. It is a commitment to ensure that no one remains trapped in the circumstances of their birth. For too long, we failed to translate many of the promises we made to ourselves in the Constitution into reality. The Musa plan seeks to change that. The multi-pronged approach involving policy reform, social accountability, resource mobilization, building state capacity, and strengthen democratic leadership. We need all hands on deck. The Musa plan is about leveraging data, ensuring that policies are not one-size-fits-all, but tailored to the needs of all, including poor people, women, people with disabilities, children, and rural communities. If we don't deal with poverty and inequality now, it will only get worse. And that poses a real threat to our democracy, the economy, and peace. The plan also focuses on building bridges between communities, healing divisions of the past. It's about creating real opportunities for social mobility for all while ensuring that the future is different from the past. We need you. Join hands with us to make this vision a reality. Together, we can accelerate the fight against poverty and inequality. Join us in the Musa plan for social justice. Together, we will change the trajectory of this nation. Despite a clear constitutional commitment to advance social justice, 30 years into democracy, many South Africans are still not free. Not free from hunger, not free from poverty, not free from structural inequality and systemic injustices that continue to hold them back. The Musa Plan for Social Justice is an integrated catalytic plan of action aimed at accelerating the advancement of social justice by breaking the chains of poverty and inequality by 2030. It is a commitment to ensure that no one remains trapped in the circumstances of their birth. For too long, we failed to translate many of the promises we made to ourselves in the Constitution into reality. The Musa plan seeks to change that. The multi-pronged approach involving policy reform, social accountability, resource mobilization, building state capacity, and strengthen democratic leadership. We need all hands on deck. The Musa plan is about leveraging data, ensuring that policies are not one-size-fits-all, but tailored to the needs of all, including poor people, women, people with disabilities, children, and rural communities. If we don't deal with poverty and inequality now, it will only get worse. And that poses a real threat to our democracy, the economy, and peace. The plan also focuses on building bridges between communities, healing divisions of the past. It's about creating real opportunities for social mobility for all while ensuring that the future is different from the past. We need you. Join hands with us to make this vision a reality. Together, we can accelerate the fight against poverty and inequality. Join us in the Musa plan for social justice. Together, we will change the trajectory of this nation. Despite a clear constitutional commitment to advance social justice, 30 years into democracy, many South Africans are still not free. Not free from hunger, not free from poverty, not free from structural inequality and systemic injustices that continue to hold them back. The Musa Plan for Social Justice is an integrated catalytic plan of action aimed at accelerating the advancement of social justice by breaking the chains of poverty and inequality by 2030. It is a commitment to ensure that no one remains trapped in the circumstances of their birth. For too long, we failed to translate many of the promises we made to ourselves in the Constitution into reality. The Musa Plan seeks to change that. The multi-pronged approach involving policy reform, social accountability, resource mobilization, building state capacity, and strengthen democratic leadership. We need all hands on deck. The Musa Plan is about leveraging data, ensuring that policies are not one-size-fits-all, but tailored to the needs of all, including poor people, women, people with disabilities, children, and rural communities. If we don't deal with poverty and inequality now, it will only get worse. And that poses a real threat to our democracy, the economy, and peace. The plan also focuses on building bridges between communities, healing divisions of the past. It's about creating real opportunities for social mobility for all while ensuring that the future is different from the past. We need you. Join hands with us to make this vision a reality. Together, we can accelerate the fight against poverty and inequality. Join us in the Musa Plan for Social Justice. Together, we will change the trajectory of this nation. Despite a clear constitutional commitment to advance social justice, 30 years into democracy, many South Africans are still not free. Not free from hunger, not free from poverty, not free from structural inequality and systemic injustices that continue to hold them back. The Musa Plan for Social Justice is an integrated catalytic plan of action aimed at accelerating the advancement of social justice by breaking the chains of poverty and inequality by 2030. It is a commitment to ensure that no one remains trapped in the circumstances of their birth. For too long, we failed to translate many of the promises we made to ourselves in the Constitution into reality. The Musa Plan seeks to change that. The multi-pronged approach involving policy reform, social accountability, resource mobilization, building state capacity, and strengthen democratic leadership. We need all hands on deck. The Musa Plan is about leveraging data, ensuring that policies are not one-size-fits-all, but tailored to the needs of all, including poor people, women, people with disabilities, children, and rural communities. If we don't deal with poverty and inequality now, it will only get worse. And that poses a real threat to our democracy, the economy, and peace. The plan also focuses on building bridges between communities, healing divisions of the past. It's about creating real opportunities for social mobility for all while ensuring that the future is different from the past. We need you. Join hands with us to make this vision a reality. Together, we can accelerate the fight against poverty and inequality. Join us in the Musa Plan for Social Justice. Together, we will change the trajectory of this nation. Despite a clear constitutional commitment to advance social justice, 30 years into democracy, many South Africans are still not free. Not free from hunger, not free from poverty, not free from structural inequality and systemic injustices that continue to hold them back. The Musa Plan for Social Justice is an integrated catalytic plan of action aimed at accelerating the advancement of social justice by breaking the chains of poverty and inequality by 2030. It is a commitment to ensure that no one remains trapped in the circumstances of their birth. For too long, we failed to translate many of the promises we made to ourselves in the Constitution into reality. The Musa Plan seeks to change that. The multi-pronged approach involving policy reform, social accountability, resource mobilization, building state capacity, and strengthen democratic leadership. We need all hands on deck. The Musa Plan is about leveraging data, ensuring that policies are not one-size-fits-all, but tailored to the needs of all, including poor people, women, people with disabilities, children, and rural communities. If we don't deal with poverty and inequality now, it will only get worse. And that poses a real threat to our democracy, the economy, and peace. The plan also focuses on building bridges between communities, healing divisions of the past. It's about creating real opportunities for social mobility for all while ensuring that the future is different from the past. We need you. Join hands with us to make this vision a reality. Together, we can accelerate the fight against poverty and inequality. Join us in the Musa Plan for Social Justice. Together, we will change the trajectory of this nation. Despite a clear constitutional commitment to advance social justice, 30 years into democracy, many South Africans are still not free. Not free from hunger, not free from poverty, not free from structural inequality and systemic injustices that continue to hold them back. The Musa Plan for Social Justice is an integrated catalytic plan of action aimed at accelerating the advancement of social justice by breaking the chains of poverty and inequality by 2030. It is a commitment to ensure that no one remains trapped in the circumstances of their birth. For too long, we failed to translate many of the promises we made to ourselves in the Constitution into reality. The Musa Plan seeks to change that. The multi-pronged approach involving policy reform, social accountability, resource mobilization, building state capacity, and strengthen democratic leadership. We need all hands on deck. The Musa Plan is about leveraging data, ensuring that policies are not one-size-fits-all, but tailored to the needs of all, including poor people, women, people with disabilities, children, and rural communities. If we don't deal with poverty and inequality now, it will only get worse. And that poses a real threat to our democracy, the economy, and peace. The plan also focuses on building bridges between communities, healing divisions of the past. It's about creating real opportunities for social mobility for all while ensuring that the future is different from the past. We need you. Join hands with us to make this vision a reality. Together, we can accelerate the fight against poverty and inequality. Join us in the Musa Plan for Social Justice. Together, we will change the trajectory of this nation. Despite a clear constitutional commitment to advance social justice, 30 years into democracy, many South Africans are still not free. Not free from hunger, not free from poverty, not free from structural inequality and systemic injustices that continue to hold them back. The Musa Plan for Social Justice is an integrated catalytic plan of action aimed at accelerating the advancement of social justice by breaking the chains of poverty and inequality by 2030. It is a commitment to ensure that no one remains trapped in the circumstances of their birth. For too long, we failed to translate many of the promises we made to ourselves in the Constitution into reality. The Musa Plan seeks to change that. The multi-pronged approach involving policy reform, social accountability, resource mobilization, building state capacity, and strengthen democratic leadership. We need all hands on deck. The Musa Plan is about
and then come back. We will start at 7 o'clock. Promise this time. Also, to the guests that are joining online, thank you for the message that you're sending, gentlemen at the back. Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening again, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. My name is Ongama Mtimka. I am the lecturer for political science at Nelson Mandela University and director for the Raymond Mhlaba Center for Governance and Leadership. I'm honored to speak today to Program Direct. And what we are going to do is there's a Musa plan video that's going to play, and then we will have a national anthem and the official welcome from the Dean, Professor Nicholas Smith, a short while from now. Over to you at the back.
Social justice. 30 years into democracy, many South Africans are still not free. Not free from hunger, not free from poverty, not free from structural inequality and systemic injustices that continue to hold them back. The Musa Plan for Social Justice is an integrated catalytic plan of action aimed at accelerating the advancement of social justice by breaking the chains of poverty and inequality by 2030. It is a commitment to ensure that no one remains trapped in the circumstances of their birth. For too long, we failed to translate many of the promises we made to ourselves in the Constitution into reality. The Musa Plan seeks to change that. The multi-pronged approach involving policy reform, social accountability, resource mobilization, building state capacity, and strengthen democratic leadership. We need all hands on deck. The Musa Plan is about leveraging data, ensuring that policies are not one size fits all, but tailored to the needs of all, including poor people, women, people with disabilities, children, and rural communities. If we don't deal with poverty and inequality now, it will only get worse. And that poses a real threat to our democracy, the economy, and peace. The plan also focuses on building bridges between communities, healing divisions of the past. It's about creating real opportunities for social mobility for all while ensuring that the future is different from the past. We need you. Join hands with us to make this vision a reality. Together, we can accelerate the fight against poverty and inequality. Join us in the Musa Plan for Social Justice. Together, we will change the trajectory of this nation.
May we stand for the national anthem?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nicola Smith, and I'm the Dean of this faculty. And I do wish to welcome you here at this public lecture. I want to apologize that we are starting much later than the anticipated time, but I'm sure that you understand that we are in a very tense time in our sector. This is something that has many, many causes. We have our students facing financial challenges, challenges pertaining to accommodation, safety, and frustrations often boil over. So at Stellenbosch University, we would have preferred to see this hall tonight filled with our students, our colleagues, and our friends. But I am very happy that we have decided to proceed with this lecture. And the reason for that is because we have somebody with us tonight who has dedicated his life to the type of issues that you saw addressed in the short clip at the start of this lecture. And I want to say thank you to Lord Hastings. Thank you so much for being here this evening. We thought it important to listen to you because you will be addressing us on the matters that is exactly those issues that we are facing in our country. So without further ado, I realize that we have a very short span of time available. We have a guest who is almost on his way to the airport. He has another engagement and he has to travel tonight still. So we will be continuing directly into his speech. I want to tell you that Professor Thuli Madonsela is outside. She is engaging with the student leaders, and hopefully at some stage we will see whether this event can also be live streamed so that a wider audience, well, it's currently being live streamed, but we hope that more people will be able to access it and to benefit from the message that I very much look forward to hear. Please.
Well, good evening, the hardy few. And I kind of thought when I saw the numbers were a little bit struggling, I thought that's clearly because my reputation has preceded me. And people have realized it isn't worth listening to an old gray-haired man. But never mind, you're here. And it's a joy to have the opportunity to speak with you. And I hope some of the things I might say will be of value to those online, but also of great value to the students who are outside. I can tell you as the chairman of SOAS University in London, I'm very used to student protests. And I have to say my normal mode is to engage and to welcome and to bring them in, but here we are. So let me begin by saying what a delight it is to be here, and can I just introduce my dearest friends who are here, and I'm so sorry that Professor Madonsela is outside. She's just been a remarkable advocate and supporter. We were together the last time, and of course her assistant Diana, in Montreal at One Young World. And I'm proud of her association with One Young World, my association with One Young World. And if you haven't been to One Young World, hurry up and get to Munich this autumn because you'll find it delightful and challenging. So let me point out, first of all, Neil, and I call her the Queen, Leseho, who are here right at the front, very dear friends for a long time, based here in South Africa, in Cape Town. When these two want to do social justice, what that means for them is to be effective in business, very effective in business. Leseho with her own wine and honey business. Neil, of course, pursuing endless dollars around the world. But between them, they have advanced the education of hundreds of South African children through the private school system to make sure they get the best education and go on to bright and significant futures. And I'm proud of the work they have done as social justice advocates. And then can I point out the wonderful Julia Strachan, who is here. You look upon Julia and you probably think she's 18 or something of that nature, but herself well into her 20s. And Julia managed some years ago to row the entire Atlantic, herself and three other, was it three or four? Three other wonderful ladies rowed from the south of England all the way down to the Caribbean in a rowboat, not a motorboat, in a rowboat, in order to flag the critical issues of sex trafficking that take place in the world and the disaster of young, especially women, who are caught in the sex trafficking business, and how vile evil and destructive that is. Here is my son Reese, and he's a delight to be with, but also to travel with me around the world. We're on our way to Kenya this evening, where he looks after a number of students, Kenyan students, who have been part of the M-Pesa Academy in Nairobi, but also who are living in refugee circumstances. But he also has his very active mentoring program in London, working with some of the toughest kids around, as you could possibly imagine. And then over here is Dumisi. Say it again? Dumisi, yes. And here he is. He's a student of politics at the University of Cape Town. We're trying to seduce him here to Stellenbosch because his girlfriend is here. So, of course, if he gets seduced over, we'll know the real reason is not academics. It's entirely personal. But delighted he can be here with us as well. So, I'm sure you're all aware of the doomsday clock. I can see some of you have longevity, which means that you will have realized that when the doomsday clock was commenced in 1947, after the tail end of the Second World War, it was intended to recognize the seconds, and therefore, in effect, the minutes, that count down to midnight. When the doomsday clock was put into existence in 1947, the world was at 7 minutes to midnight. 7 minutes to annihilation. We are now at 89 seconds. The scientists who are responsible for assessing on an annual basis the state of our world affairs concluded just last month that the danger and perils that are before us are of such a serious nature, our inclination to destruction of one another is savage. 89 seconds to midnight. Just a few weeks ago was the annual gathering of the super elite thought and business leaders in Davos. And one of the people there, who's a dear friend of mine called Arlo Brady, was reflecting on what he had observed about executives in business and politics at Davos this year. And he quoted none other than Lenin. Of course, we're conscious of other Russian leaders at the moment. But this is not Vladimir Putin. This is Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, who wrote these very important words when he said, or rather quoted these very important words, when he said around about the turn of the close of the First World War. This was the person who was president of the USSR between 1922 and 1924. And he said, there are decades when nothing happens. And then there are weeks where decades happen. Now, I don't need to tell you what you've been observing in the last few weeks, but doesn't it feel like decades have happened? That the pace of confusion and uncertainty, the height of the rhetoric, and the lack of clarity in the rhetoric has made us all more either fearful or foolish or frantic or frenetic or just downright uncertain. Global priorities have shifted to such an extent that the movement to the end of the doomsday clock is getting faster. And we're not certain what global leadership means anymore. When society's priorities shift, as they clearly have done, we easily lose sight of what are actually the most important things we should focus on. We get consumed with the news agenda and the threats and uncertainties. So I had a look at the global risk agenda published by the World Economic Forum at the tail end of January. This is their 2025 estimate of what are the most serious risks affecting the world in 2025 to 2027. They say the number one risk that our world faces is misinformation and disinformation. We have become so consumed, we become confused. There is so much data, so much information, we don't know which one is true or not true. Number 1, they say, misinformation and disinformation. Number 7, they say, is inequality. Out of the top 10 most serious risks, inequality is the 7th most serious risk the world is facing. And here in South Africa, I don't need to paint to you what that inequality means and looks like, because you live with it on a day-in, day-out basis. It is the other story of your great emerging nation into a new democracy. Inequality seems to be embedded partly by acceptance and partly by deep desire to remove it towards equal justice. But then there is this other 4th factor, societal polarization. So number 1 is misinformation, number 2 is extreme weather events, number 3 is state-based armed conflict, number 4 is societal polarization. In other words, people can no longer agree on what is a consensus of the right thing to do. People can no longer agree as to what the critical priorities of nationhood or leadership actually are. So because we can no longer agree, we cannot any longer set clear paths to progress. Society is too dysfunctional to allow us to have security. That is not just a random thought from the World Economic Forum. It is a serious and challenging risk. Now, I'm not that old, but I am old enough to remember people who I first met in my teen years who had been victims of the Second World War in Europe. I remember meeting Jewish elderly people then in my teen years and into my 20s who had observed the victimization and destruction of their families, their colleagues, and their homes. Just a few weeks ago, we remembered at Auschwitz the 80 years since the uncomfortable and awful construction of that somewhat secret burning camp. 1.5 million people, mainly Jews, who died at Auschwitz. And we remember very clearly the others that were built, 6 others built in Poland: Chelmno, Belzec, Sobito, Treblinka, Majdanek, and Auschwitz-Birkenau. 850,000 Jews were slaughtered between 1942 and 1945. But it wasn't just Jews who were slaughtered. It was black people, disabled people, Roman people, gay people, anybody who didn't fit the paradigm. And for those who've read anything of the stories of the many, many Jews and others, Africans, disabled people, who were taken to these awful Poland-sited but German-created camps, you'll know that people were separated at entry, the women and children to the left, the men to the right. Almost immediate killing of the women and children. The men, some attempt to make them work in order to do what their leaders wanted to fulfill. If they didn't fit the pattern, they were removed. The horrible thing about it all is that we find out now in 2025, according to a survey conducted in 8 countries at the tail end of last year, that 1 in 9 young Germans is unaware of the Holocaust. 1 in 9. 1 in 9 young Germans doesn't believe it happened. And 1/4 of young Germans cannot name a single concentration camp. No death ghetto, no place in which the destruction of Hitler's regime took place. But in 8 other countries, and in particular in the United States, half of all American adults surveyed said they could not identify a single killing site associated with what they doubted of the Holocaust. These things are critical to students, to adults, to our countries, because these things register whether or not we know and understand how crisis can grip us. If we so easily forget, and it slides from our memories, and therefore it slides from our emotions, we become ourselves victims of misinformation and disinformation. We ourselves portray a sort of citizen who no longer feels nor holds the pain. The message from the 80-year celebration, as it were, remembrance of those who lived, they said, never forget, never undervalue, never disconnect. Now, I was fascinated to come across Pumla Gobodo Mazikitela. She is the winner of the 2025 Templeton Prize. The Templeton Prize awards her $1 million in which she could pursue her social justice ambitions. This is a little bit of her background. Professor and influential former member of South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. She was awarded the 2024-2025 Templeton Prize for her insights into trauma and forgiveness in post-apartheid South Africa. And she developed a model for social healing in the aftermath of conflict, something she calls the reparative quest. She writes very distinctly about her experiences of getting to know Eugene de Kock, something which I know many South Africans would never wish to do. But she made the choice to get alongside the former commander of state-sanctioned death squads so she could sit and, as she says, hold his hand, listen to him, and help him to understand what remorse, forgiveness, and reconciliation are all about. She explains how her encounters with Eugene de Kock led her to this concept of what she called reparative renewal. This reparative renewal, she says, this is what we need for the social justice required in 2025. We need to be able to not believe that simply by an act of forgiveness, a one-off act of forgiveness, that the issue has gone away. It has not. It is important, she says, that we go beyond the language of forgiveness and finality and closure, but we learn how to take forward what we've experienced from the pain of the issues into transformation. Does that make sense? We don't say it's over and done and therefore complete and it's finished. Slam the door, never talk about it again. No, she says, what is essential in her discoveries of studying trauma is to open up our moral imagination to the people who are themselves the perpetrators and the pain givers, so we can move forward together into a new future. She says it's about creating the conditions of building solidarity across historical divides. This is what she means by the reparative quest. I don't just encounter, I continuously, constantly engage. I'll read one bit to you. She says, talking of grooming a young 16-year-old South African boy just after high school, we send them into the army. We're instilling a certain kind of mentality into them. And for people who are like Eugene de Kock, who grew up with a father who was a member of the brooded bond, so it wasn't just the state, it was also within his own family, that black people were called the danger. They were defa, the black danger, as they were called in Afrikaans. And so growing up and believing that moves you towards functioning against the danger. When you experience renewal and reconciliation, you function the other way, towards the danger, in order to move those who are in the danger, including the perpetrators, out of the temptation of evil and into the opportunity of renewal. She talks about her faith was a critical driver for her, from her parents, but her own decisions. She says, I'm not exaggerating when I say that part of the nurturing of my values came from the community of black families I've lived with in the township where I grew up. But she says, I'm inspired by what I believe. I'm a scholar, as you know. I'm an academic. But there's something about that even scholarship has that has always been to me more like a calling, a decision of faith. I've been fascinated listening to her podcasts, reading her writings, and thinking about what she calls the constellation of contradictions that all of us are. She says, all of us, like Maya Angelou says, are neither devils nor divine, but we're able to be both if we choose, or one or the other. The context in which we live and the decisions that we make either connect us or disconnect us from our divine nature or our devilish intentions. Social injustice is embedded in all of us. And all of us have to move in a spiral towards reconciliation and renewal. Let me read one other section. She says this, holding the hand of Eugene de Kock, who was responsible for the awful, atrocious, and incredibly destructive and violent actions of apartheid South Africa in fulfilling the will of the understood government. She says this, I found that touching his shaking hand, holding his hand, gave something of the presence of the other human to me. We were two humans touching with one another, discovering that actually our humanity overwhelmed our differences. And in that moment of humanity, we could plan together towards a future. His finished, mine still in process. Now, I believe that social justice relies upon us finding ourselves alongside the person who's the most difficult to encounter, in the presence of the one we don't want to be with. Otherwise, we simply send ourselves into our own place of isolation and segregation. One of Africa's greatest leaders, Kwame Nkrumah, talking at the beginning of his nation in 1957, said, countrymen, the task ahead is great indeed, and heavy is the responsibility. And yet it is noble and a glorious challenge, a challenge which calls for the courage to dream, the courage to believe, the courage to dare, the courage to do, the courage to envision, the courage to fight, the courage to work, the courage to achieve the highest excellencies and the fullest greatnesses of men and women. Dare we ask for more in life? And the question we have to ask ourselves is, in our longing for social justice, have we got it within us to do what she did, to sit with the perpetrator, to find common humanity, to understand the drivers which cause what she called the ultimate prime evil? Do we have it in us to believe in these ambitions so much so that we will break our back to meet the person who may well break it again? Without that, there is no sacrifice. There is simply position. You'll have all seen recently that the former US President, Jimmy Carter, was buried It was a fascinating sight to watch a man at 100, no longer alive, but every remaining living president and prospective president was there to witness his funeral. 2 years ago, his wife, Rosalind, their marriage of 77 years, had also died. Her funeral was highly significant, gathering of all of the Carter family and friends. And the Washington Post in the United States and the Times newspaper in the United Kingdom and a number of news outlets carried a story no one had barely known about before. This is the headline: Convicted murderer who became the White House nanny. Now, you may look up the story for yourself, and I hope you will, and read the detail of Mary Prince, a young, black, African-American woman caught up in a violent incident in the state of Georgia where Jimmy Carter was the governor. This young girl attempted to separate two aggressive men in the street who were having a fight. In the process of the separation, she grabbed the gun of one of them. Not having ever held a gun before, it went off. The courts decided that this wasn't manslaughter, but they decided that she had intended to kill, which was not the case. She got a life sentence. There was Mary Prince, as a young, barely turned 18-year-old girl who had come from a desperate and poor background in a Georgia jail for life. But the Carters, in an act of true social justice, governor and wife went to visit her to find out who was this woman. Who was Mary Prince? What had happened on that day? What's the true story behind her magnanimous and decisive act? Did she intend, or was she caught out by events? Well, on understanding, hearing, and believing, the Carters decided to do the most dangerous of all things possible, to bring Mary Prince, the convicted killer, into the governor's mansion to be the nanny to their 3.5-year-old child. That is social justice. When Jimmy Carter subsequently finished his time as governor, and there was an 18-month period in between running for the presidency, Mary Prince was back in prison in the state of Georgia. When Jimmy Carter became the president, she was moved at their request to the White House in Washington. She became the nanny to their daughter again, and the president became her probation officer. That is social justice. That is the individual taking a decision in the face of the state to do the remarkable, even perceptively dangerous, compellingly difficult, annoyingly frustrating thing that the system says you shouldn't. Standing on the firm intentions of their faith, the Carters brought in Mary Prince to look after their child. When Rosalind Carter was buried 2 years ago, Mary Prince was there. When Jimmy Carter was buried in the first week of January, Mary Prince was there. She now nannies Amy Carter's little children. The story goes on. And that remarkable story of how a president absorbs a prisoner, of how a president is a probation officer, of how an act of integrity and sacrifice allowed this woman with her 2 children to find freedom in such a way that she could be respected, brought into the hierarchy of Washington, and allowed to have a life that actually dealt honor to her decision. Many of you will know the story of the wonderful President Mandela's restaurant experience. If you've forgotten the story, let me remind you. One day, while president in Johannesburg, he decided to go to a restaurant that he really liked during his time as a young lawyer. When he went there, and he was with his security team, went into the restaurant, sat down at the table with the 3 security officers around him, he observed on the side by the bar a man who was shaking, but he recognized his face. He said to one of his security assistants, "Go and ask the man to come and sit with us." The man reluctantly got up from his bar seat, came across, sat on the edge of the table with President Mandela and the security team, continued to eat his food whilst shaking. This was a white elderly man. And at the end, when he finished his food, asked the president if he could leave, and President Mandela said yes. The man got up and walked out somewhat nervously. The security team said to Mandela, "Who was that you were so keen to bring him in and sit him here? Who was that?" Mandela replied, "That was the man who was my prison guard on Robben Island. He was the man who held me in shackles day in, day out. That was the man who, when I asked for water, when I was parched, when I was feeling sick, he would come and first urinate on my head and then require me to ask many times before he finally brought me some relief. He tortured me. But he said, this is my opportunity to show him another way, a better way. After he tortured me, I screamed, I cried," said Mandela, "for some water, and he came and humiliated me, laughed at me, and instead of giving me water, urinated on my head. I'm now president of South Africa. I could act with revenge. I could send him to prison. I could destroy his life. But I'm not like that. This conduct is not part of my character, nor of my ethics. Minds," said Mandela, "that seek revenge destroy states, while those that seek reconciliation build nations." Walking out to freedom as I did that day from Robben Island, I knew that if I didn't leave all the anger behind, all the hatred, all the resentment, I would still be a prisoner. You see, this social justice contract, this compact, this opportunity to transform nations through forgiveness and renewal, as our Templeton winner makes so clear, is the beginning of a series of agreements towards a long future. It is not the end. It is the start of taking up and embracing the difficult one, connecting with the unacceptable, meeting with the person who has been the most dangerous in our lives, to help them step into a freedom we will ourselves say we proclaim. Now, I found myself reading a very interesting article recently, a very deep and long article called The Anti-Social Century. Some of you will have read the works of Robert Putnam, Bowling Alone. He began to talk about the broken society in the early 2000s. Societies which he said are all about individuals. That capitalism, but consumerism is all about what I get. That as nations begin to build up from poverty, so individuals come to assert their opportunities of capital growth. And the question is, what's wrong with that? Well, this article, reflecting on Putnam's work and written at the end of last year, talks about the new culture of self-imposed solitude that rich nations and rich communities almost inevitably fall into. He says it is the most important social act of the 21st century. And they give some key statistics. It says this, let me give you some figures. Eroding companionship can be seen in numerous odd and depressing facts of American and Western life today. Men who watch television now spend 7 hours in front of the television for every hour they spend hanging out with somebody outside. The typical female pet owner spends more time actively engaging with their pet than they do face-to-face with their friends. 7 hours more observing what's on the screen than what's with a person. The issue of global loneliness is such an extreme fact of the 2020s and 2025s that both Japan and the UK and a number of emerging nations are now seeking ministers for loneliness. It's easy to say, what? How strange. But the severe negative health effects of isolation cause people to come to radical belief systems. If we want to scale up societies towards effective social justice, the article points out clearly, the only way is to have continuous, connected, relational identity. Our own happiness is rooted in our communities, not in the politics and policies of things around us, but in our ability to engage with people, it asserts, engage with people who are different to us, learn from them, and then work to change things to their advantage and to ours. Robert Putnam pointed out in his book in the year 2000 that from 1985 to 1994, active involvement in community organizations fell by half in rich nations, particularly where social activity was required between different demographics, different people of color or culture. People opted away. What did they opt away towards? They opted away towards unbridled individualism, most evidently seen in screen activity. Now, in some ways, I'm not telling you anything you didn't know. We all are aware of it. We're all familiar with the implications of this isolation in our own lives. We're all familiar with our fear of the other and what that fear of the other leads us to do, which is to find ourselves consistently on the other side of reconciliation and constantly on the side of more extreme assertion. What we're watching in our world right now, German elections next week, South Africa's own divisive elections last year, American elections with results which are globally challenging, which is a polite word, find ourselves caught up in a maelstrom of significant uncertainties where the old common agreements of what was valuable have long gone. In 2015, the United Nations, with the agreement of 186 countries, set out the Sustainable Development Goals, which should be achieved by 2030. 17 straightforward, easy objectives to end extreme poverty and hunger within our lifetime. To bring about agreed social justice through fair policing and good courts. To ensure water for every child and individual in high-stress communities of high temperature. To ensure toilet facilities for every adult and child on the planet. To protect our natural environment. The 17 are simple, straightforward. On every one, we have gone backwards. We've gone backwards because of war and conflict. We've gone backwards because of pandemics. We've gone backwards because of social isolation. We've gone backwards because individuals have lost the grip on social justice. I'm very driven, as are many of you, by my faith. I became convinced of Jesus Christ when I was 14. and I'm more convinced now that I'm 67 than I've ever been. I always will be. And I take seriously the words of the prophet Micah, whose words can be found in the Micah chapter 6, verse 8, asking the question a full 1,000 years before Jesus, what does God require of you? What does God require of me? To act justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with my God. I don't want just to be a proponent of social justice. I want to be, and I am, an activist. No matter how old I get, I seek the energy to remain determined to continue to pursue what people have long given up on, even in their teen and early 20 years. We must not. We must persist. We must strive. I was very impressed with the story, and I'll wrap up with this, the story of a lady, I'll give you her name, Pamela Hemphill. Pamela Hemphill joined in the destructive riots of January the 6th, 2020, in Washington, D.C. January 6, 2021. She was part of the club of hundreds who saw it as their right to affront American democracy and change the decision of the presidency. She was found guilty. She was sent to prison. She got a 60-day sentence. She was declared guilty. When the new president came to office, he wiped the slate. He released the existing prisoners. He declared their sentences null and void. And she declared that in her integrity, she could not accept the freedom she was being given. She said, I was wrong on that day. I broke the law. The capital pardon is unacceptable to me. I was a destroyer of my nation. I pleaded guilty because I was guilty, and accepting a pardon would serve to contribute to their gaslighting and false narrative. I cannot rewrite history. I will not do so. That is integrity. That is somebody accepting the responsibility of their action. But we have to go beyond that responsibility of our action and turn it into, therefore, from my integrity, what is my sacrifice? If faced, as the Carters were with Mary Prince, what would I do? If faced, as Mandela was, with his perpetrating persecutor, what would I do? If faced with Eugene de Kock, what would I do? Whom would I talk to? How would I affect that moment? A long time ago, just a few quotes, Socrates said, the secret of change is to focus all of our energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. Martin Luther King said, hatred paralyzes life. Love releases it. Hatred confuses life. Love harmonizes it. Hatred darkens life. Love illuminates it. Mahatma Gandhi said, the day the power of love overrules the love of power, the world will know peace. And finally, Albert Einstein commented that the world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything. So, sacrifice and integrity, the hallmarks of doing justice. The examples before us, around us, should be within us. The challenge is to embed these convictions so they become my story, your story, our story. Therefore, the nation is built by what we let go of and by our continuous reparative pursuit of the other who has affronted us. To spend time with those who don't deserve a moment, say some. To break out of our isolationist tendency to comfort and extreme lives of plenty. To seek a nation where we give away more than we ever take in. When we know we have, we enable those we know who do not have. At the end of life, what really matters is not what we bought, but what we built. Not what we got, but what we shared. Not our competence, but our character. Not our success, but our significance. Living a life that matters is to live a life of love. And there is no love without sacrifice. Thank you for your attention.
That is well deserved. That is a well-deserved standing ovation. Now, Honorable Lord Hastings, if you can take a seat, please. You could not have chosen the right approach with us this evening as a country. I feel like you've done a heart surgery on a nation, because in these last 2 weeks, South Africa has been under siege. And it's a siege that has, in line with that prediction by the World Economic Forum, gotten us wondering why we do what we do. And in fact, it would be interesting to see that data about what do we recollect as a country in terms of where we come from, what happened, and why we do what we do. So in isiXhosa, they would say, you went straight where the calf died, because it was quite a process while in herding communities. Somebody says that the calf has died. It was quite a process finding where exactly it died. So amaXhosa, when somebody speaks something that is very direct, they would say, uye apho kufele khona ithole. So you went straight where the calf died. Thank you for that. Another round of applause. So it's interesting for me that we were blessed with a generation of leaders that, just like Baba Madiba, had that same heart. And we have among us somebody who's kindly agreed to be ambushed. I came via the correct channel. Aunt Vanessa, I came through that channel. And Judge Albisex agreed to give 5-minute reflections. Our constitutional court, first constitutional court justice, just 5 minutes reflections, because you could well have been describing how he decided to treat the people who had bombed him. Judge Albisex, everyone, on stage. As the good judge comes up, please prepare. We're only going to take 4 questions from the audience. Okay, I'll make it 5. We're only going to take 5 and then give the Lord the time to respond. And after that, Prof. Thuli Madonsela will close for us. Judge Albisex. Just making sure the statesman has switched it on.
Well, thank you for proving that I'm still alive. Somebody quoted something I once said, I wrote, that if I'm woken up in the middle of the night and I'm asked to make a speech and I can't do it, then I know I'm dead. 5 minutes ago, I was asked, could I respond? And I'm responding, so I'm alive. In a way, it's very easy to respond because this was a heartfelt presentation. Not unwise, not unthoughtful, but primarily heartfelt. And it was presented with a sense of verve and joy. Sometimes the most beautiful ideas, somehow all the life is squeezed out of them to sound erudite and important and intelligent. And you allowed the ideas to come out, and you told stories, and it was beautiful. It reached me. I've been on many platforms with Pumla, Geboorte Madikizela. I think my most exquisite intellectual moments were sitting with her at the university in Milano, and we'd agree to exchange ideas with no preparation whatsoever. And she told the kinds of stories that you mentioned today. And of course, for people, anybody who doesn't know, Pumla is a professor here at Stellenbosch University. So it's also thank you to Stellenbosch for giving her a space, a home, a place where she was allowed to develop and evolve these ideas. Thank you for inviting the Lord to come and reinforce and connect up with that. And it had a special resonance for me because I met the man who put the bomb in my car, nearly took my life, through our Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And it's something beautifully South African, especially South African, based on this notion of Ubuntu, of human interconnection, of not thinking the greatest right of all, as an American judge said, is the right to be left alone. The greatest life of all is to connect up with our fellow human beings, and to be able to do that. And the poverty and the injustice prevents us from doing that. So any action that brings people together in that sense is an action of social justice. And some of these extreme, almost melodramatic examples are proof of what's possible. And why do we all resonate so much, so positively? Because it's a belief in positivity, in humanity, in the potential of optimism. Optimism isn't automatic, it's not self-fulfilling, but it is very life-enhancing and very strong. The only comment I would like to make is it's hard for many South Africans, what you're saying, because there's been so much generosity from the Mandelas and the Tambos and so many other people. It's not even noticed. It's not acknowledged. It's taken advantage of. It allows people to get on with their lives as though somehow this is automatic. It's huge. It's why we have a constitution, why we have a country today, that generosity. And for me, that generosity wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a sign of strength. A sign of a feeling that our morality is so powerful, it's so strong. That's who we are, that's who we want to be. We're not doing it to be nice to somebody else, we're doing it because we believe human beings can connect up. And to the extent that you have come from outside and maybe not even directly knowledgeable about those experiences, but intuitively you've sensed that. You've done us a service here. You've reinforced the better sides of ourselves. And let me end with a reference to Eugene de Kock. He was the worst of the worst. And he acknowledged he was the worst of the worst. And he acknowledged because this young black woman came to him not to crush him, not to kick him between his legs, not to sneer at him, but to find out who is he, who was he. And it wasn't only that he opened up to her as a human being and discovered some humanity in himself. He went into the witness box. He spilled the beans. He told the world the horrible, gruesome, terrible things that had been done. He made his contribution in that way. It never can wipe out the people he'd killed, the people he'd tortured. But it was his sign, his commitment to a new reality of integrity and interconnection between human beings, that he made it in that way. Today I believe he's a crushed spectre of a human being, that there's almost nothing left of his spirit. And that's the tragedy he brought upon himself. And you brought to us here in Johannesburg, in the turmoil that's surrounding us, a turmoil that you are used to, the turmoil of humanity. You brought us that sense of hope, that sense of optimism, that sense of we can do it and let's do it. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Lord.
Feel free, sir. Feel free.
Would you want to have some questions?
I am going to go to the questions, but I don't know if you wanted to say something to Judge Albi before I release him to be where he would rather be sitting at the moment.
I'll say to my friend, thank you. Thank you for the honesty of that reflection, and given the tragedy and pain you've experienced, thank you for being willing to remain optimistic, hopeful, and to retain your conviction. It's essential. Bless you.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, Judge Albi Sachs, thank you. I don't want to detain you there, sir. Wow, we're coming to you. This is such a healing moment. You know, sometimes you forget who you are. And once other people start putting labels on you, it gets worse, because you actually get to believe what they say. And I cannot overstate how important it has been for Lord Dr. Hastings to have been here at this time, when the world is putting a false mirror on who South Africa is. Anyway, we're taking questions, and I think that there are colleagues with roving mics that are going to be coming to you. I'd like to see some hands. And the academic in me, if there aren't hands, is going to point at people. Yeah, we really appreciate the distinguished guests that are here. Unfortunately, we couldn't call them out one by one because we started in the way that we did. We've got the executive mayor of the city and leaders in the country and in the city and the university. So please excuse my ignorance, and I'll come from Gqeberha, so Prof. Tuli will be able to say when she comes later on and say it was that guy from Gqeberha and apologize. Hands, please. I see number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 with the red top. So the politicians sat in one place and caucused among themselves. Number 5? Number 5 at the back. Okay. Yeah, the naughty corner is that side. Let's start at the row, sit number 17. Sit number 17 in the middle. I don't know what row that is. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and thank you to the Honorable Lord for a very insightful lecture, and also to the response of the Honorable Justice Sachs. Let me be praxis-orientated in my approach. I don't know whether it's a comment or it's a question. In the context of South Africa, of course...
please share your name, sir.
Oh, sorry. My name is Hetman Klapo. I'm one of the progressive forces in that theology faculty there.
Thank you.
I teach there some way. there is a contextual question from the erstwhile oppressees of apartheid, that why should it be the Africans who extend particularly the concept of Ubuntu to the erstwhile oppressors, whereas there is an argument that forget about it, it happened, let's move on. Why should it be the erstwhile oppressees of apartheid that should extend sacrifice, whereas there is no restorative quest, or as Professor Gobotomati Kizela calls it, a reparative quest? Perhaps I differ with her interpretation of the reparative quest.
Thank you.
As it were. So why should it be the victims of apartheid or of oppressive systems that should extend this sacrifice, whereas
Thank you.
the erstwhile oppressors are actually saying, shut that door?
Vakela, sir. Thanks a lot. Thank you. The naughty corner.
Good day. My name is Ndiko Kelemgeneni. What I want to ask Lord Dr. Hastings is that how do we even begin to navigate a situation where, in terms of social justice, we feel the need for it, and yet at the same time, when we try to raise these issues, we are shut down. We are told that this is not the space for the social justice that we are trying to push for. Yes,
Thank you, sir. Wow. Record setting. Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much, Lord Hastings, for that lecture. It was really insightful. My name is Liam Gillison. I'm a student in the law faculty. I thank you for bringing the Lord and Jesus into your lecture, and I really appreciated that. I wanted to ask how you see your role as a Christian in this world, because sometimes it can be very difficult, and your view on that, and then linked to that, how do you keep yourself motivated in a world that's crumbling apart? Because that's also something that I struggle with, especially like events that are happening today. And how do you make sure that you can move past that to be a social justice ambassador and to change the world like you have?
Thank you. Lady in red.
Good evening, everyone. It's funny you mentioned that. That is my alias, by the way. But that's for football, by the way. Back to business tonight. I'm Charmaline Swigelaar. I'm part of TUSM, and anyone who haven't heard of us, we are the United South African Movement, and we are hitting South Africa with a bang, because we are here for change. The question I'm here to ask, on a note, just a background about TUSM, we are not a political party, we are a civil society movement, and we go into the community, we work with people, and we try to bring change, because South Africa needs it, and especially in a time like now. As the ceremony Sir gentleman mentioned earlier, there's a lot happening currently, and we need change in this country. And my question to everyone is, or to you, sir, what are being done to GBV? This is a big issue in this country, because I've worked in crime research as well. I've worked at Nyanga Police, Bloemfontein Police, 2 Code Red police stations in Western Cape, and I've seen enough. I myself have survived GBV. Our justice system are failing victims, are failing children, adults, and I'm talking women, men, and children. It's breaking up families. What are we as a people are going to do forward in this country to try to prevent it? Because there's enough that are not being implemented. I've dealt through the whole system, so...
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Blue shirt in front of you. Oh, okay. That's the academic me. One at the back. I think that's the last one at the back. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Lamise de Klerk, a community warrior for change. I take note first of the SDG 17. which is really necessary, or it's an integral part of all our communities. I also take note of the fact that Lord said that we are moving backwards and we have a big task at hand. Whatever we try, then somebody, say for instance, like see now said gender-based violence. Every year gender-based violence is the top thing in government, but nothing gets done to really stop it, shall I say, or make way with it. In all our communities, it's still allowed, and for us as women, we need to take a stand to really stop. If we say we want to stop it, we need to stop it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lamis. That wraps up the burning questions of the day, and the Lord that acknowledges the Lord of Lords.
Well, thank you. Impossible to answer all of those because they are long, reflective questions with long, considered answers, which only go halfway, if that. Just taking the first point about, if I may, why should it be seen to be only the blacks who must move the halfway? I've never felt that that was the way that ultimately renewal and reconciliation should work. It has to fall on everyone to sacrifice. That has yet to be practiced in full. But it has to be a choice, because sacrifice has to be a choice. And the choice has to come from the conviction shared in common, the kind of nation you want to secure, that I want to believe in. That nation only builds when all of us give, black and white, colored and differentiated. Everybody has to give. And some have to give more than others. You know, I retain my conviction because in every small act that I can do and that you can do, I can move a wave of transformation. It's a small act. But the small act is enough of an influence to move another and then another and another. The reason I wanted to focus a little bit on Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone and the latest updated information about loneliness is because I'm sure your observation and mine would be that the richer societies become, the more isolated and individualistic they become. And that is happening in South Africa. To the black rich, to the colored rich, and to the white rich. But it's happening everywhere. The isolationist tendency is only about short-term security. But that is not a nirvana I want, and neither do you. We don't want that. That doesn't give us heaven. That isn't the kingdom of God on earth. That isn't even the beginning of something worth contending for. That's just separation. What I'm contending for is that no matter how privileged any of us become, and I've been overprivileged, but no matter how privileged we become, our first duty is to, exactly as happened in the case when we talked about what Professor Pumla did in making sure she reached out to Eugene Koch, do the dangerous thing. Go to the place where reconciliation and you perceive evil to be the strongest. Where the reconciliation is most needed, the evil is the strongest. Engage exactly because everybody says you shouldn't. And participate precisely because you hold on to a vision of a better world and you're willing to build it. One of the people that we're so very proud of at One Young World is the professor, of course, from Bangladesh, who helped to create the Grameen Bank. There he is now, at his early 80s, basically acting as the president of Bangladesh, effectively, put there by students, and Here he is at the tail end of his life, taking on the challenge of renewal, not finding the golf course of so-called independent isolationist freedom. The pressure of age and privilege is to withdraw. But the imperative of privilege is to lock in my judgment. It is to do exactly as the prophet Micah said. What does God require of you? Not to talk justice, to do justice, to show mercy and to walk humbly. That's why I love the Carter story so much. Which one of us would choose to do that? But they did. And when people who have excessive opportunity show us how to walk humbly, none of us has an excuse. So to go back to the opening questioner, and I'll just wrap with this. I'm conscious that I do have to get off to a flight to Nairobi tonight, and so I have to exit in precisely 15 minutes, so please forgive me. But what I suppose I wanted to underline so strongly is when you stand where you stand now as a nation, and I've had the privilege of coming to South Africa over 20 times, and I've been all over the country, from the top end to the bottom, to the big cities, to some of the most complicated and violent townships. I've been there multiple times. I know the people at the heart of it and the people who are leading change, just as my two friends here, Neil and Leseho, are doing so effectively, not just in Cape Town, but across the country. And if I reflect on my first time ever coming here, which would be nearly 20 years ago, and I look at South Africa now, I said, thank God. Wow, look what's happened. Maybe I won't make it to the tail end of all that should be achieved, but at least it's begun. And so I must retain optimism that the rest can be achieved. The fact that the SDGs have gone backwards doesn't make me abandon them. It makes me more determined to fulfill them. We must resist innate depression. We must not give in to the cynical, desperate views of those who would constantly tell us, be silent, withdraw, disengage. I finish with this. Every one of us has neighbors and friends. But if you don't have neighbors and friends, you've fallen into that TV, phone-watching, isolationist category who is getting more and more lonely. But if you can spot it now and break out of it, and use your homes, your gardens, your spaces, your streets, gather people who feel equally pursuant of justice, and do it together. Build the case, do it together. I do it in prisons every single week in the UK. I've been to prisons here in the continent of Africa, I've been to prisons in the US, but I focus on prisons mainly in the UK. And why do I do it when I don't have to? Because I believe in a better way. So I'll contend for it, and I'll go do it, and I don't get paid for it. And I do it because it's an act of love, commitment, and compassion. That is essential to all of us. Grab it before you lose it. Thank you.
Wow. There's the heart surgery, and without wasting any time, we're going to be having reflective concluding remarks from Prof. Nicola Smith, and then the director of the Center for Social Justice. We have to hear something from her saying thank you also. Thank you. Prof. Tulima Tonsela afterwards. Thank you.
Activist optimist Michael Hastings, thank you so much for a wonderful lecture. It was truly motivating, inspiring, and it gives us hope. I'm not going to give reflective remarks. I want to do the vote of thanks, but I want to say that if I think about your lecture, what I take from it is that you've told us to learn another way so that we can show another way. And I think in our environment, it will result in us not only talking about social justice, doing social justice, and doing better, whether it's with regards to the SDGs or what we do in our immediate environment. There's a lot of homework for us that we can take from this lecture. And I think that's the wonderful thing about a public lecture, because it encourages discourse, which we need. We need much, much more dialogue in our communities, whether it's the university or elsewhere. I have been asked to thank some people tonight, and I will try to do it in a speedily manner. First of all, I want to thank our hosts, Professor Tuli Madonsela and our rector, Professor Wim de Villiers, who's online, he's in Europe at the moment, for arranging this lecture and for also securing such a wonderful, inspiring speaker. I want to thank the Minister in the Presidency for Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, Marapeni Ramakgopa. I think I saw the entrance. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your support of this social justice lecture, and we trust that on another occasion we can engage more fully. Our program director, Dr. Ngama Mtinka, thank you so much. I really also enjoyed the story about the cough. I'm going to use that in future. Because we edited our program on the go, we didn't have our usual preamble reading today, but I do want to thank Reagan, Abungile, and Daniela, because they have done it very, very well in the past, and we appreciate the fact that you were available to do so again tonight. Then to the organizers, Diane Kahiza, Temba, Siesi, thank you so much. I'm sure you did not expect all the organization and the challenges that you saw today. We really appreciate all your efforts, also supported by Marna Lawrence, Stefan Vaughan, and Emma van Buren. We had a huge logistics team tonight, Amira Brown, Chuma, everybody else, thank you so much. I want to thank the technical team, Tammy Arense, Justin Alberts, the team from Creative Gear, and they are especially important tonight because they ensure that this lecture is also available online and that it can be revisited in the future. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Prof. Tuli. We have around 10 minutes. I would be very happy if Lord Hastings do not need to rush to the airport. So Prof. Tuli, I invite you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Nicholas Smith, the Dean of Law at Stellenbosch University, for those concluding remarks and vote of thanks. And thank you to Lord Michael Hastings for an amazing speech that we listened to outside and only got the tail of it inside. In Siswati, we have a saying, whatever has happened is the same as that which God created. I always reflect on my life and say, if I had just learned that lesson only, I would never ever be angry. Because I would be always able to move with the flow, with agility, and when your emotions and your thought process are agile, you're able to always think with your prefrontal cortex, which is your executive brain, and never with your amygdala, which is your fight, flight, and fly. So this afternoon, Temba, who led us through this process, had dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. We expected a house full, an overflow, and online. In the end, agility by the program director and the leadership in this room ended us with a different program. I started with the Swati saying because there's an equivalent in the Bible, as Lord Michael made us go to that direction, which is 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 18, which says, "In everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus to you." You will agree with me that the session we ended up with, where our iconic Justice Albie Sachs and Lord Michael sat there and reflected on this approach that Lord Michael is suggesting we all take, which is sacrifice, but also being willing to be the one to make the first move, even if you're the wounded one, is much better than what we had planned. With all the excellence in my team, Lord Michael and I were going to talk about ourselves being counselors in the One Young World and what his message means for young leaders, which was a good message, but personally, I enjoyed White House so more than I would have enjoyed that session. And I thought it was a very brief moment, but it's a moment we'll never forget. It's a moment that has touched all of us. It's a moment that will make us, when we go home, to think about it and say, what will I do based on what those two amazing gentlemen said? Albie, I can say Albie because I've known him forever, with his lovely wife, Vanessa, reflected on what he experienced as a person and how he had to confront those who harmed him. Lord Michael reflected at a global stage on how the world can pan out differently depending on whether we do have that leader who makes that first move of sacrifice. I want to thank Ungamla and Timka. Leaders don't need a title. They don't need permission. They just need to read the room and decide what is the best thing. Yes, you consulted with me, but I thought you'd already come up with a brilliant plan. And thank you for your brilliance, sir. For me, personally, I just want to say, I know it's not going to end in this room. Prof. Nicola, you always support us. And I know that when you speak to your colleagues at the rectorate, you'll put in a word about what we've heard here about sacrifice. Not to suggest that there's no sacrifice at the rectorate. They are forever trying to find money to save these students. Our Vice Chancellor literally and figuratively walks with us, Prof. Wim de Villiers, to make sure that we get money, but there's never enough of it. So hopefully this message is not just about extending peace or extending a hand of reconciliation to those who have harmed you physically, but it's also about extending a hand of reconciliation to those who have been deprived socially and economically, and ask, What can we do to help? Thank you to all of you. Zinzi, who is in the room from Woolies, decided that hunger is a big problem and has spoken to the Woolies team. Next time you go to Woolies, you'll find a till that says, if you want to donate to end hunger, you can donate. That's leadership, that's self-leadership. That's extending the hand. You don't always have to go to somebody and say, I'm sorry. I think Woolies doing something about hunger is the biggest I'm sorry I can think of for those who are hungry. Amanda Tekis, sitting right here in front of me, who, when a student this year could not re-register for a final year engineering, as we were walking with that student, she said, don't worry, I'll pay. That's extending a hand of reconciliation. Because Miss Rupert once said to me, as we were walking, and she received us to entertain us, she said, reconciliation must have legs. It can't just be words. And after Amanda provided accommodation for the student, Jeanette Mombeck, who I just got a note from, decided they'd had a tragedy, very painful thing where her son was shot and could no longer use accommodation outside. They decided, as we were walking with the student, on that very same day, as we were telling colleague, hey, we have a problem here, said, she can come and stay with us. And it was meant to be for about a month or 3 months, pending a solution. It ended up being a whole year. And Jeanette Mombeck's husband decided, I'll chip in too, provided transport every day. Can you imagine that? Total stranger. Because the Good Samaritan is all of us. I do believe that if we want a peaceful world, we must understand, without going into big lesson of Ubuntu, we must understand that we are each other's keepers and anchors of hope. Thank you.